to speak to, for example, the Jean Ghomeshi situation. I think for a lot of guys in particular, and a lot of what I'm seeing, like certainly a lot of us are shocked, and you know, originally what started off as a few like Billy Bob Thornton, Moxie Früvous jokes faded to genuine shock as this became something very real and something very serious. But I think for a lot of women, and maybe you can speak to this, it didn't become something serious. It was something serious because it is something serious. Denise Balkazoon in the Globe, just this morning I was reading an old piece of hers where she said the only thing that has changed is we know one guy's name and he happens to be famous. And I think for a lot of guys in particular, like, I mean, this is not something that we deal with in the same way or with the same pervasiveness. And I think for a lot of us, there's this, you know, we want it to be done and we want it to go away. And I think once Ghomeshi is dealt with, there's going to be this real temptation to go, great, that's done. We took care of it.
Solved it.
Yeah. You know, violence against women is done. We took care of it. So how do we get away from that, for example?
Yes. Okay, here we go. So I think you said something very important in that that I want to emphasize and maybe pick up on a little bit, which is it seemed like a lot of men were utterly shocked about Jean Ghomeshi. I don't know a woman in media in Canada who was. Like, not one, not a single one at all. And it doesn't mean that anyone knew details necessarily, but it sure does mean that, like, long before I ever like would have had an encounter with him as a human being, I had women pull me aside and tell me to be safe and to be careful. And I don't know anybody who didn't have that experience. And there are so that the difference in shock level was really jarring, because I guess I kind of assumed that, like, of course everyone knew and they just didn't care, because the stakes are different. You know, and there were sort of a series of pieces that came out surrounding that incident, authored by men who were discussing sort of, in a lot of ways, their feelings about the Jean Ghomeshi case, and in a lot of cases, and in some cases in particular, how like, oh, I kind of knew, but I didn't know, or, you know, sort of dissecting their, like, what did I know and what did I not know, and feelings of guilt associated with that, and some of them were great and some of them weren't. But, I mean, what really hit me about that is just the surprise. I think we need to stop being surprised when these things happen, because women aren't ever. But it seems like men pretty consistently are, and I think that sort of dissecting what causes that surprise, and it's a combination of disbelief and a combination of just wanting to put it away, and a combination and risk levels being different for different people that causes that, but that surprise that creates that critical distance between, you know, believing women and taking action and just sort of wanting it to go away is really important.
I think one of the things that, is this working? Maybe? Yeah. I think one of the things that will be important especially for people who are here, who've actually actively made the decision to engage, which is amazing, is to look in the mirror and say, you yourself get one get out of jail free card. That's it. And it's happened already. So from now onwards, you can't say you're surprised. You just can't. You can say you didn't know about a person, sure, but you can't feign shock. You can't. It's done. Because I think that's important, to draw that line and say, we're moving forward. We will not have the same conversation that we've been having forever. And I think that's a turning point. And you need to make that decision today and say, I don't know what I don't know. I will continue to learn. I will vet, and I will, you know, dig for facts, et cetera, et cetera. But from this point onwards, actively make that decision and say, I will choose to believe people who have been marginalized, half the population, maybe even more. Make that decision today. You will be part of making all of this better if you just did that piece.
And actually, I'm gonna hold you right there because I think that's a great segue to open up the discussion to the audience as well. And at this time, we're gonna spend the next few short moments with the audience and allow you to ask any questions that you may have. So feel free to use the microphone, step to the mic. It's not all as scary as you may think it is. But yeah, do we have any questions from the audience at all?
There's a question.
Question? Yeah, come on down.
You're the next contestant.
Yeah. So feel free to step to the mic and share your name and feel free to ask your question.
Hi, I'm Chris. So a couple of things you were talking about remind me of a thing I read a couple weeks ago. We were talking about being made to feel like you don't belong in tech spaces. And I was reading a thing and it said that in 1986, 37% of comp sci degrees went to women, and in 2001 it was 20%, and 2011 it's around 12. And yet, as time goes on, it's like, you know, we're more in tech, all of us, right? Like, we're all running our life through smartphone apps, and we're all playing video games, whatever. So why is it that as tech becomes more mainstream, as it becomes more of all of our lives, and it should be more inclusive because it's more everywhere, why does it become less of a welcoming place or less of an inclusive place for women?
Well, because it's more important. And it's more important, and there's more money there, and there's the prestige associated with it is greater.
I think this is an appropriate time to bring up the Barbie Book.
Yes, let's
Yes,
talk about the
woo.
Barbie book. Because I like talking about things that make me want to murder everyone.
Not everyone.
Not everyone.
I'll
You
also
guys are
say, you know,
okay.
that many of my experiences in my life and in my work are very, very good. And I work with a, split team, and they're all tremendous. And yeah, the developer I worked with most recently was male, but the cinematographer I worked with was female. And I think that those are the steps that we make working as we take those steps forward, is just building teams based on who's awesome. And really just that being the criteria by which we pick. But how do these things happen? It's systemic. It's having books that say, you can be an engineer, but make sure you've got a guy who can really do it for you.
I think another thing is we often hear that there aren't enough women in comp sci. That's why there aren't enough women in tech. So it's a pipeline problem. There aren't enough people entering it. And I think what we don't talk about is, why are we worried about the pipeline when everyone's just going to hell in a handbasket afterwards? And that's what's happened to it. So the 37%, the 20%, all those women who entered comp sci and were passionate about it, took it at school, got jobs, have chosen to leave because where they're working is hostile to them. They're not rewarded appropriately for the work that they do. And it gets to a point where you are at a juncture where you say, do I continue doing this? I am exhausted. I'm not able to be my best self, do my best work. There's got to be a better way, and they opt out. Yep. And often we're told that women do that because they want to have families or they have children. All of these are stereotypes. I also know women who have families and children and do great work. But it's difficult to continue doing all of this and be an activist, which really becomes your full-time job if you want to just stay in that space and make a dent. So I think that counts for something.
There's a huge retention issue as well. It's not just a recruitment issue. It's by far and away a retention issue that the women who graduate with those degrees don't stay in the industry, and then there aren't women to mentor each other, and then you don't have colleagues who are women, you don't have bosses who are women, you don't come into a space where there are people who can support you, and so not only are people are leaving at both ends, I guess is what I'm trying to say.
Okay, thanks a lot.
Yeah, thanks.
Hi, I'm Laura Reed. I presented yesterday, I did the opening, so thank you for listening to me now again. My mom was one of the first women in the wave of technology. She's 63 years old. And just being her daughter and knowing that she tried to do this single mom, being involved in a tech industry. I hear what you're saying totally about that fatigue. It was very tough. She stuck it out. She didn't walk away as much as she wanted to, and as much as sometimes she was literally almost forced to. But she did stick it out, and she made a fantastic career. However, that said, given turnover and different economic climate and changes and layoffs and trying to find work again later on in her life, in her 50s and now in her 60s, where she's having to start again. Just recently, she has had to be, restructuring and all that kind of stuff. Go back into the workforce, and she's how many years away from retirement. I can tell you that she's dreading going into these establishments and having to have her resume scrutinized and for her to be quizzed as a 63-year-old woman. How do you know what you know? Tell us. Let's ask some really humiliating questions so that you can prove to us that you actually know how to turn one of these devices on, when she's been coding since before they were in diapers. And it's just very frustrating to sort of think of the environment that she's having to go back into again, and with ageism being an extra layer onto, not only being a woman, but being an older woman. And yes, she's been supported. Yes, she's had great support among her peers, but she's also been not taken seriously by not just men younger than her, but women younger than her. It's like so she's getting it from both sides a little bit. So I just wonder if you guys can speak to how ageism and how some of the women who you've looked up to in your careers and how they've impacted you ultimately.
I think that I am 100% where I am because of the female mentors that I've had, whether it was expressly so or not. And I say like where I am, and not just in terms of my career, and I do think it's my career, but I also think my kind of general well-being, the fact that I get to be who I want to be, the fact that I say, you know what, I'm going to dress the way, and I still actually have to say I'm conscious about kind of what I wear to what occasions.
I'm clearly not, as we've established.
But that idea of, there have been some phenomenal, strong, powerful, successful, whether it was in tech, whether it was media, it is the women who have kind of led the way for me. It's really, this is the thing that's so frustrating with ageism, is that especially with women, where men gain respect, as you grow and you become kind of dignified, it seems like it's very, very hard for that to be the same case for women. Yes. And it's just, yes. It's mortifying, and it's embarrassing. Yeah. It's embarrassing for all of us. I think we're all put through this. I have this analogy that I always like to tell. It happens sometimes at the beginning of an interview, or it's the same, it's like this juggling thing where at first it's like, I'm going to throw a ball right to you. And then it's like, I'm going to throw it a little bit to the side, to the end where you kind of feel like you're kind of going like this to catch them. If you catch a dozen, then you can talk. Yeah. And it's that kind of juggling act. But we need to do anything we possibly can to retain the women who are in their 50s, in their 60s, because they have done phenomenal things. This isn't, we're not in 1970s. This is they've built this industry also. They've done phenomenal projects, and the hard thing about being the person who blazes the trail is that there's no one around you. They legitimately didn't have the people to have their backs because they were blazing the trail.
That's right.
Whereas we're on that trail, we've got people to have our backs, and so if no one doesn't, and I say this collectively, and I say this collectively to the men in the room, it's our own fault if no one has our back, because the trail has already been blazed. So we need to be extra there for those who blazed the trail, because maybe there really weren't the people to have their backs in the first place.
I would also say that one of the kindest and most generous things that we can do for anybody moving into any kind of space is to not be shocked when somebody knows what they know, right? To not be surprised when somebody is qualified, regardless of who they are and what they look like and how old they are or how young they are. There is, in addition to to writing about games, and doing graduate work on games. I wrote about heavy metal for a living for about 6 years. Everything I love hates me is basically how that goes. And there is nothing gives me and gave me like more joy than just someone assuming that I knew what I was talking about,
Which should be like the base
which should
level.
be pretty much baseline, or also do the like. Just like gleefully surprised that it's like, oh, being a girl and knowing things like that. Cut that shit out. Like seriously, that is
feel like
not
I need
fun.
that on my fridge.
Like, oh my god, just isn't it? It's like, look how cute you are, or like, what a special snowflake, knowing a thing, being competent. Just seriously, stop doing that. If you can just trust someone's competence. That is an incredible kindness that you can do for anybody in any of those spaces.
What they said. All of it.
Thank you very much.
Hi, my name is Audra, and Natalie loves me and I don't hate her. So I'm the one exception. I wanted to, I guess, ask of people's feelings about anonymous, because I feel like a thing keeps happening on the internet where like anonymous will do something like good, and then everyone's like, oh, aren't anonymous the best? And then if you say, well, they also doxed women who talked about Julian Assange's sexual assault accusations, people are like, okay, but anonymous is not actually a thing, it's a loosely, and it's like, they want like the credit as a collective thing when they do something good, but then when they do something shitty, it's like, no, they're not, you don't understand.
But they're anonymous. Irony.
Right, so yeah, I guess I wondered how you guys, because I just get super exasperated, but maybe I don't live in the same kind of tech world that y'all do.
I think it's very similar to the whole not all men thing, right? Because what we want to do is we want to be, and it's a collective we as humans want to be fair. We do. I don't think people wake up in the morning and say, today I will be malicious. Like today will be the day. I don't think people do that. But I think well, sometimes Natalie does, but that's different. But I think it's this sense of jumping into spaces where someone is being vulnerable and saying, well, I don't do that, and therefore it's not true. Even if what you were saying we took at face value, what you've done is derailed. And I think a lot of the stuff around Anonymous and similar sort of what started out as anti-establishment, well-intentioned endeavors has devolved into this thing that's become personal. It's become vendetta-led. And people organize. What is, I think, disappointing for me is I'm seeing people self-organize around things which are meaningful to them. It's just the wrong things. You're organizing around excluding people, and that tells me it's not like you don't know. You know this. You're doing it. It's a choice. And I think one of the panelists yesterday was talking about what it means to be a man. And she said it's choice. Really, that's what it comes down to, because we can't continue pretending we don't know all of this is happening. If going forward we continue to either be complicit or exclude ourselves from action, that's a very specific choice on the individual's part, which plays into something like Anonymous being good or bad or fuzzy.
I think it also speaks to our general thoughts on technology in general. Once upon a time it was blame Elvis and blame rock and roll and blame the Beatles, and now we look at tech and internet and video games and kind of blame the demise of the society on that which is new and that which we don't know, as opposed to being introspective and saying this is not an issue of the internet, it's not an issue of technology, it's not an issue of even anonymity, it's an issue of human beings and families and parenting and education and the conversations that we have. And so when we talk about Anonymous, I tell you, there was a time when Anonymous came forward in the Rehtaeh Parsons case that I was like, oh my God, Batman. Like I had this kind of crush on Anonymous as a whole. And where it doesn't, and that is the potential, like that is the power that we, that we move into these new spaces and use the power of information and the collective for good. And to do anything else with it is just like, what a waste of time. So that's sort of my feelings when it comes to Anonymous, is just like, let's look at it for what it is, as opposed to just another almost red herring. Yeah. Let's talk about human beings being human beings and making the right decisions.
And also that acknowledging that nothing is necessarily above critique because it does something good. Like there are lots of people who are genuinely like lovely people who occasionally do shitty things. There are lots of like wonderful movements that get things wrong, and that to critique something that was not handled well, or that anything like that, is not to discount everything else, right? That we sort of, to understand that even those things that we sort of nominate our heroes and our champions may occasionally like need to be critiqued, and that very, very productive discussions can come out of that, and that those champions can serve us better when we do.
I think that goes back to the whole, we need to be able to say, hey, I'm changing my mind because I know better now. I know more, and it's fine. And we need to be able to do that for each other and say, that's cool. And the other thing that we don't do is speak when we're in that gray area where we haven't really made up our mind. But are exploring. That's a valid place. Please, like, explore that. That's important.
And I can speak to the male perspective on that, in the sense that, like, to reference the not all men thing, there is, and it's a hurdle you have to get over, and sometimes it does chase you, and you sort of have to wrestle with it. You get this pervasive sense that when these issues are being criticized, and when these social structures are being criticized, there's this sort of twitch. And a lot of us have it, where it's easy to misconstrue that as men and you being criticized. And, that's something that, like, that's a great opportunity to actually, like, if it strikes a nerve with you, you can shut it off, you can say, oh, you don't know what you're talking about, and not all men this and not all men that. Or you can examine what it is in you and what it is you believe that's striking a chord with, because that's, like, this is what we're addressing, and that's a great opportunity to grow and a great opportunity to be of service, I think.